Hello and welcome to Dialogue. The 2024 Shangri-La Dialogue is taking place in Singapore this week, where decision makers from across the Asia-Pacific, North America, Europe and the Middle East are gathering to discuss the most pressing regional security issues in the world. What are the most significant challenges to regional security today, and how can we avoid a worsening situation in the South China Sea against a backdrop of U.S. competition with China? Join us for discussion today from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining me today are Dr. Yan Yan, Director of the Research Center for Oceans Law and Policy at the National Institute for South China Sea Studies, Joy Pang, Independent Political Analyst, and Herman Laurel, President, Asian Century Philippines Strategic Studies Institute. Welcome to Dialogue. So, Dr. Yan Yan, I will start with you. The Chinese Defense Minister Dong Jun is to join the dialogue, Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, and of course, he's also paying a visit to the country. So, what's the highlights? What's to expect from the Chinese perspective?
Well, it is reported that the Chinese Defense Minister Dong Jun will deliver a speech on China's global security concept, and he will meet delegation leaders from different countries. I think the purpose of Chinese delegation to participate this year's Shangri-La Dialogue is twofold. On the one hand, China will reaffirm our commitment to pursuing a path of peaceful development and China's willingness to deepen international military cooperation. And also on the other hand, there are many accusations recently, especially from the Western world, against China over the Taiwan question and also the South China Sea, and many things are happening in the Asia-Pacific region. So I think taking this opportunity, China can express our stance and explain our policy regarding all these issues to the whole world.
Well, Joy, seems like there's a pattern, like accusations against China, or to the lesser term, like a misunderstanding or lack of understanding of the Chinese policy, of the Chinese action. And another, I would say, outstanding question probably would be the Taiwan question. We know there's a new leader, and because of his pro-independence or his speech, for example, mentions basically the two-state status that is independence of Taiwan. Basically, he's calling for that or declaring that. So that triggered a sort of a military crisis. So that will also be, let's say, one of the principal topics probably at the dialogue.
Of course, that's going to be one of the topics at the dialogue, along with these long-standing the South China Sea issues. But it's important to stand back a bit and see how these things keep coming up. And in a way, you can see that these are incidents that are almost manufactured for the occasion, and we're seeing a kind of a gradual kind of increase in the number of these provocative statements and actions. So that and giving President Marcos making him sort of the keynote for this is, of course, as my colleague just said, a way to ground the issue. And I think he's going to say President Marcos is supposed to uphold the rules-based international order, a concept that's in great disrepute right now. Nice, you see that the West is really searching for an ideology or a reason for these actions, one after another. So you saw even in the Financial Times recently the recommendation that, well, let's give up on the rules-based order because there's no way we can be consistent on this anyway with what's going on in Gaza, for example. So it's really a kind of structured and manufactured situation for conflict and division. So the Shangri-La Dialogue occurs in that context, and the discussions are set in that context. It's important to stand back and see that.
Well, yes, to observe closely. So Yan Yan, we earlier mentioned the Taiwan question. Of course, this is one of the critical issue, basically, in terms of China-U.S. relationship. It's also against the backdrop of increasing U.S. competition or U.S. efforts to contain the rise of China. Some people would say, Taiwan question is in a way being weaponized against China by Washington. What do you make of it?
Well, if I recall clearly, in this April, last month, the U.S. Defense Minister Austin just had a phone call with the Chinese Defense Minister over many issues, and Taiwan question is just one of them. I think to China, Taiwan is at the core of China's core interests, and we won't. There won't be any compromise. So this is for clear. And also during the phone call between the two defense ministers of China and the United States, I think Dong Jun make it very clear that the PLA won't never give in to all separatist activities for Taiwan independence. And I think that is a clear message to the United States and also to the whole world.
Mm-hmm. Well, John, back to you here. Of course, when it comes to Taiwan question, people in the West, in particular Western governments, they sometimes, compare that to the situation in Ukraine. But of course, for the Chinese side, we understand that very well. It's different because Taiwan is a province of China, but Ukraine is an independent country. But anyway, some people would say they are trying to make it like, or to launch a proxy war or another proxy war against another country. This time around, maybe in the Asia-Pacific region. Is there any possibility? Does that sound reasonable?
This is absolutely crazy. It's of course unreasonable and impracticable. But this is not to say that people are not advocating it. So we're in a very strange time. So you have in the Ukraine situation, escalation towards what could become a direct war with Russia, which would go nuclear. And then, of course, in the Middle East, we have a situation described by many observers as genocide, supported by the West, and something which alienates the rest of the world and completely discredits any notion of a rules-based international order. And then in the middle of all this, these provocations over Taiwan. So these are so crazy, so unhinged, so delusional, that you need almost a pathology of the West to understand what's going on now. In the middle of this, of course, we have these very polite and well-structured types of situation like the Shangri-La Dialogues every year, and we come along and discuss these issues. But it's important to stand back and not be led by the escalatory ladder that these issues, for example, over the South China Sea, over Taiwan region, these are very well established. The facts about these are clear, and yet they continue to be played out. So I think what the rest of the world, in particular Southeast Asia, which I'm in Kuala Lumpur right now, and which I've observed for a very long time, the stance to take is to stand back, to realize that we are in a deep system crisis of the West and of the Western-led order, and to understand that many of these issues are a result of an old order breaking up. And time is on our side. The thing is to not to be rushed into, not to be escalated into conflict, into totally insane, world-destroying conflict, while we wait while a new order is coming to be. So I think that's the right attitude towards these things, because we've gone over and over again these issues over Taiwan region, over the South China Sea islands. The facts are very clear, and even where there's disagreement, there is a peaceful process for the countries of the region to resolve it among themselves. So we simply need to wait for a moment when this is possible. Mm-hmm. But I think to be led by nose with one sort of provocation after another is not the smartest thing right now.
Yeah, speak of playing up the issue. Laura, here, if you look at these disputes between China and the Philippines, for example, in the previous, let's say, the 6 years time during the President Duterte's time, China and the Philippines handled the disputes very well. We had a peace, we had calm, we had cooperation, we had a rather strong relationship. But all of a sudden, we had a new administration in the Philippines, and then we had this worsening situation in terms of the disputes. So what happened?
Well, in the time of President Duterte, the independent foreign policy allowed him to manage freely what the situation of the Philippines demanded from the relationship with China, which is cooperation. And it was certainly a big boon for the Philippines economically and politically. We got bridges, irrigation systems, gigantic water supply project, flood control projects, and so on. So this carried on to the first year, at least the first 6 months of President Bongbong Marcos's term. But suddenly in February of 2023, after a very successful and laudable visit to China with a grand welcome from President Xi Jinping on February of 2023, President Bongbong Marcos suddenly, without explanation, without rational presentation of reasons, pivoted to America. Many people suspect, of course, that some corruption opportunities are behind it, as well as probably threats from the United States. So this has been tragic for the Philippines. In 2024, the first quarter of 2024, investments crashed by 62 to 63%. And certainly the relationship with China is one of the problems affecting this. We have an association for Philippine-China understanding, and some members have already reported that their credit lines from Chinese suppliers have been suspended or is in jeopardy because of fears of both sides, particularly at the supplier side, of probable problems from the tensions with the Philippines and China, between the Philippines and China. So this is already negatively affecting the Philippines. And it is not only the Philippines that or Filipinos that see this. Our ASEAN neighbors are also observing this. For example, the Singaporean foreign minister visiting Manila and talking to his counterpart, the Foreign Secretary Manalo, mentioned that the tensions in the South China Sea are already affecting negatively the economic and trade conditions of the region. So this has been really a very big setback for the Philippines. Of course, internally in the Philippines, the nation is getting divided. Even the family of the president is divided. He is allowing the Americans to run roughshod over the country with its military bases, with its military drills, while the president's sister, Senator Amy Marcos, has been playing devil's advocate and resisting these overtures from the United States. And just recently, just a week ago, the presidential mother, 94 years old, Imelda Marcos, visited the opening of the new chancery of the Chinese embassy in a very public event, showing her desire to resolve the tensions with China peacefully and cooperatively. So the nation is divided, the presidential family is divided, and of course the population is also divided on these issues. So nothing good is coming out of this for the Philippines.
Mr. Herman Laurel, do you think the Philippines or the public or the government, understand that? Of course, we mentioned earlier, like there's a background. The background is like a U.S. is, fiercely competing with China in their own term, or to contend China. Taiwan could be a weapon against China. Of course, in that sense, people would say the Philippines could be a weapon against China. Do you think people understand that? People think that's a possible, or that's probably what's going on?
If I recall correctly, at least 80% of the Filipino people in several surveys that have been done from 2023 has expressed fears that the tensions with China may result in war. And this is not something they desire. So it is indeed rejected by the Filipino people. However, the massive control of the American influence media owned by the Philippine oligarchy, which is connected with the American financial cabal, has such massive influence that they can sway public opinion. But the educated class, the thinking class, the objective intellectual class, I think can appreciate the danger to the Philippines and the negative impact of this situation. And I think the president himself realizes this. And in fact, in November 2023, at the sidelines of the San Francisco APEC conference, President Bongbong Marcos took the initiative to have a discussion with President Xi Jinping on the aisles of the halls of the APEC conference and proposed easing of tensions. And this process continued for the next 2-3 months until January, when an officer of the Western Command of the Philippines in charge of the deliveries of food and other materials to the controversial BRP Sierra Madre, the derelict ship in the Ranay Chao or Ayungin Shoal, operationalized, in his own words, the admiral's own words, operationalized the instruction of the president to help ease the tension in the South China Sea. But 2 months later, 3 months later, he was sacked by forces within the administration whom we suspect were maneuvered by the Americans to do this. And President Bongbong Marcos has just so far kept quiet. And this is the dilemma. I think even the president knows the crisis we're in because of these pressures from the Americans, creating these tensions. And I also have to mention that in February 2023, when President Bongbong Marcos pivoted to the United States of America again, there was a Project Mushu that the Americans pushed on the Philippine government. Project Mushu is the name. And it is a propaganda operation operationalized by a faction in the Philippine Coast Guard and the Philippine military, provoking China to respond to such water cannon, we call it in the Philippines, allowing provoking the Chinese Coast Guard to water cannon our ships and boats in order for the international media to cover this and report it all over the world and proclaim China as the bully and the Philippines as the victim. And the expressed objective of this Project Mushu is to exact a reputational damage on China. So we can see. But anyway, we're now in 2024 and things have taken a turn for the worse.
Yeah, well, that's speak of this propaganda operation, John. I think a lot of people, if they are a keen observer of what's Washington operation, for example, there's at one point, the Congress appropriated a certain amount of money, like a few billions,
500 million.
Yeah, for the NGOs,
million.
for the media, basically to pick up if they're basically to tarnish the image of BRI, and now I guess it's targeting China.
Right.
No, as I said, as we're here to discuss the Shangri-La Dialogue, I wanted to try to contextualize it. It's been a useful dialogue. It's organized by a British think tank, but hosted very capably by Singapore over the years. I think 21 of them, if I'm not mistaken, have been held. It's been a useful mechanism, but it's showing its age. It's really the set of assumptions that come with it are part of the problem. They're part of this system crisis that I'm talking about, a hierarchy, a Western-dominated hierarchy of several hundred years in search now of a justification, while all the justifications have sort of collapsed one by one. So it's an increasingly brutal and mask-off type of coercion, so that discussions like this become more and more empty. You're talking about rules-based order, people will laugh at you. Well, maybe this is the order, this is, the West is about defending freedom, and people will laugh at you too. So what's needed in the region, so that we're not led by the nose discursively, right, and conceptually, by this old order. What's needed are our own fora, our own ways of discussing things, and in this regard, there is the Beijing Xiangshan Forum, which has begun. That's right, and it's that's an important one. There are other ones in the region, such as next week in Kuala Lumpur, there's the Asia Pacific Roundtable, but more and more people need to set up their own, to discuss this in their own terms, rather than answering one after another the really rather stupid, really silly types of objection that come up, and just the naked propaganda. They're just so ignorant, for example, of the facts, that it's just tiresome to keep having to refute them. I mean, just a simple example, since we've been discussing the Philippines quite a lot. So it's just been clear from meticulous archival research done by a scholar at Beijing Institute of Technology recently, that the French and British, over the last colonial powers in the region, absolutely considered the Xisha and Nansha Islands, the Paracel and Spratly Islands, as Chinese. So, and not under the Americans, which at the time ruled the Philippines. So many of these issues are the product of the colonial era and were deliberately left unresolved in the so-called decolonization and incomplete decolonization process. Taiwan is definitely another one of these. The whole issue is very much part of the era of Japanese aggression and imperialism, and it's disgraceful, it's laughable that we now have a situation of Japan coming in and claiming to stand for Taiwan, when this situation is very much a product of the Japanese annexation of Taiwan. And furthermore, that Japan has agreed in its normalization of relations with China after the war that this is Chinese territory. So we don't want to keep going back to this and to have really vapid, vacuous framings such as rules-based order or freedom. Our challenge is to set the agenda in our own terms, beyond the Shangri-La Dialogue.
How do you look at that? I understand that in the countries in the region, most of them, if not all of them, for them, the priority is really about development. So we need more trade, more investment in each other, with each other, instead of, like somehow accelerating or raising the tensions or creating more troubles for each other. But now we have a U.S. factor here. So how does ASEAN community look at this issue?
Absolutely. ASEAN's priorities are human priorities, development, peace and concord in the region, and an openness to all. And in this regard, it is defined for a long time and stands by its so-called ASEAN neutrality. But it's important to understand that very important to understand, that neutrality is not simply a triangulation between two sides. What we have here is, let's go back to where that neutrality began. It's a kind of commitment to the principles of the non-aligned movement. It was standing, not wishing to be part of the Soviet or the US bloc during the Cold War. But now this is a different situation. This is the West versus the rest. And here, ASEAN standing up for its own sovereignty is truly important. What all that neutrality was about preserving its sovereignty and having solidarity with other nations of the global South. So now that's a very big and important issue. Development, as you said, Chinwo, is a key thing. It doesn't come into these securitized discussions, beloved of the Anglo-American type of fora. Global, the link between this, the fact that we're still recovering from COVID, that's completely left out of it. So there's a whole region to develop, and that development is hand in hand with the most powerful economy in the region and our neighbor, time and forever, China. So there's a completely an air of unreality about the media and also the type of discussion we tend to have about South China Sea and so on, that I think we should just step out of. And as I said, back to this issue, we need to be able to define our own issues and conduct and solve these problems on our own. The Philippines taking this tack is, quite frankly, I mean, the leaders won't say it, but it's quite frankly a kind of embarrassment for ASEAN. But in the ASEAN manner, they will wait for this to tide over, for good sense to prevail.
To prevail.
You know, China is our geography, right? It's not just a today or tomorrow issue. It's our neighbor.
Mm-hmm. So, Mr. Laurel, of course, we say the U.S. is a superpower. The U.S. is let's say, has a lot. They are capable of, let's say, making changes or stirring up trouble for certain region, for certain country. How do you see the role being played by the U.S. In terms of the South China Sea dispute here?
Well, the U.S. Is a puppet master. It uses proxies, as we see in Ukraine, as we see in Taiwan, as we see in the Philippines. I don't think the United States wants to confront a peer power like China, or as in the European continent, Russia. It is avoiding direct confrontation with a peer power, especially today when this military technology of China is already exceeding in many ways America's military technology. And certainly the willpower and the manpower is exceeding the capacity of the U.S. to match China. I think the U.S. will continue to use proxies in its effort to contain China. Other proxies like Japan and South Korea. It will continue to contain China with this ring of bases, which the Philippines has allowed 5 to be added to the ring of bases around China. I am still hopeful that the crisis within the United States of America, financial, economic, and social, will overtake the United States' strategic plan to wage proxy wars against China. So on that note, I think I would rather take a positive view, work very hard to reduce, if not eliminate, the United States of America from the geopolitics of the region. I think, again, I'll go back to ASEAN, which has the Zone of Peace, Freedom, and Neutrality Pact among themselves, and the Southeast Asian Nuclear-Free Zone Pact. I think ASEAN should take these more seriously and raise these issues with the Philippines and with each other and with the regional powers, such as subpowers, such as South Korea and Japan, and together make the region truly neutral and keep out the gunboat diplomacy of the West and the United States of America.
Yeah, real diplomacy is necessary. Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's discussion. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.